So we are going to today, we're going to start off, first of all, by finishing up what we didn't get done on Monday, talking about resumes. So we talked on Monday about the different parts that should go in a resume and a lot of different tips and everything for resumes. What we're going to do today, just for a few minutes, is actually look at some examples of resumes from a couple of Code Guild grads. And then after that, we'll move into the main thing that we're going to talk about, which is on Monday, of course, we talked about some of the more generic kind of job application-y things that you'll want to have in place, like your LinkedIn and your resume and everything. What we're largely going to talk about today is the code-based things that you'll want to have. Because I can guarantee, first of all, I can guarantee, for example, that 100%. That a question you're going to get in any interview that you have is going to be something along the lines of those example questions that you looked at before your capstone presentation. That whole thing about show me a project that you've built, tell me something about it, or or show me an example of a time you've ran into a challenge while coding and how you overcame it, or something like that. You are going to 100% get those sorts of questions. Remember that, like we talked about on Monday, since you are, of course, changing careers, you don't necessarily have a lot of experience on your resume. So you are really going to be leaning in on not necessarily your job title experience, but in your projects. That's the main way that you're going to be able to prove your experience and prove your skills. So we'll talk about a bit about those sorts of things, about some of the profiles and portfolio pieces and everything that you'll want to put together in terms of that, because that's another huge thing that you're going to want to be able to show off to potential employers. After we do that, we will, with the time that we have left, we'll start talking a little bit more about, less about some of these materials and some of these documents to put together, and a little more how-to. So we'll start talking a little bit about networking and informational interviews. So we hinted about that on Monday, that networking is the best way to get a job, get to that interview stage. We'll be talking a bit about that. We'll also talk a bit about what kinds of jobs are out there, because there's more job titles and job roles that you're qualified for than you might necessarily think. So we'll talk about some of those, and that should take us through the end of the day. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? All righty, then let's get to it. So first thing I want to show off is we're going to use Austin and Brandon. We're going to use those two students from last time as kind of examples, guinea pigs again. So let's look at Austin's resume. Technically, Austin has been working in the industry for a couple of years now, but the resume that he has here on his LinkedIn is still predates all of that. It's the same resume that he had when he was just working as a TA and taking the advanced class. So it's a good example of a resume of someone who has very recently graduated and is looking for that first position and everything. So one thing that you'll notice right off the bat is that it has 2 columns. This is a little bit more work to set up in software, but it does make it easier to use the entire page. It is very common with resumes that just have one single column. You can end up with space over here on the right, especially over down in the right bottom, that doesn't necessarily get used. So this can be a way to basically get more on the page. This is also kind of doing a 2-column is also how my personal resume is laid out. I'm not going to show you that one because it's a little bit different. I'm not switching careers, so mine looks a little different. It's not really as applicable to what we're doing here. Another thing you might notice is, remember we talked about the difference between above and below the fold, like in a newspaper. If we look at his resume here and we kind of draw a line halfway through the page, so kind of like like you fold a newspaper, so it's got the above and the below part. The most basic essential information is all above the fold. It's all easy to see. It's all the first place people are going to look. Above kind of this fold, again, is basic contact information up here. And then he's got skills going down here, but notice that it goes from kind of the most important things. Here are the languages. And then after that, it starts to get into frameworks and some more of those small things, some of those different skills that we talked about on Monday, where there's all of those different things that you can look at that are different kinds of skills and everything. But the languages part is up here and is the highest. He's also got projects up here. Notice that projects, again, is above work history. So here he's got the name of the project, when it was done, whether it was a group or a solo project. I would say if everything on your, if every project on your resume is a solo project, you don't need to specify whether it's a group or solo project. But if anything is group, do make sure that you point out that it was a group project. That's perfectly valid. Most tech projects, apps, things are done in groups. So that's perfect. That's perfectly valid to have a project that you didn't do solo, to have something that was a group project that you contributed a chunk for. That is completely valid to put on your resume. But just make sure that you point out that that you didn't do it 100% from scratch yourself. Here you can see again, just like you might have for a role on your resume, for an experience. Similarly, it's got little bullet points about what was done and a little bit about what the application is. And finally, the tech stack. So that this is great because this means that a potential employer can come look at your resume and see exactly what pieces you've been working with in your projects without even looking at any of those projects. The only thing I would suggest here to Austin to add is I think there's room here to go ahead and add a link to the deployed capstone, or even just a GitHub version of it, so that someone who's looking at this has a link they can follow, or an address they can follow to go ahead and see what it looks like actually in person. So below that, again, the skills goes down into more kind of professional skills. Again, these are those soft skills that I don't necessarily suggest. Oh, there's my mouse. That I don't necessarily suggest putting on your resume. I think that most of these are better shown through your projects and your work history and your skills. Education is kind of down here at the bottom. So he's got his PDX Code Guild experience. If you remember from when we were looking at his LinkedIn on Monday, he's got more education in and training in different things that's on his LinkedIn that is not here on his resume, and that's perfectly fine. Again, a LinkedIn is basically where someone goes where they want to get kind of the full idea of you and your professional experience. A resume is very much a bullet points, just the facts sort of way to do it. So in here, it's perfectly fine to not list out every single thing in your resume, especially if of course, you can talk about it in an interview. It's in your LinkedIn. If people want to see your full history, you can definitely keep this to just relevant things. And then finally, again, closer to the bottom is work history. So you can see that basically he's got two positions here. One is some relevant work experience from his time as a TA at the Code Guild. And then down below is a job listing for his time in the Marine Corps, in the military. If you do have military experience, I would recommend, especially, absolutely. I think military experience looks good if you're applying to a just a plain old civilian job. But if you are applying to anything that maybe needs clearance or anything that works with, I know there's a lot of jobs, and there's a lot of jobs that our grads get that are in IT and web development, but are for either civilian jobs in the government or defense contractors, things like that. If you're considering anything like that, if you're applying to something like that and you do have a military background, make sure you do put that in your work history. This is also a good example of how Austin has had multiple roles in the Marine Corps over the course of 8 years, but they're not broken out here. You don't see Marine Corps this, Marine Corps that, Marine Corps the other thing. They're all condensed into just one job listing here. And then it has basically the bullet points for all those different things. So this is kind of what I was talking about on Monday, where sometimes if you've got a work history that isn't strictly relevant and it's taking up too much space, one easy way, especially if your skills are similar like that, or sorry, if the roles are similar like that, one easy thing to do is to go ahead and do something like this, where you go ahead and put it down under work history, where you kind of condense multiple positions, even if they're at multiple companies, into just kind of one listing, so that you can trim that down a little bit. It gets the idea across, it gets the idea of what he did in the Marine Corps, but of course it doesn't go into crazy depth about every single thing and every different role in the Marine Corps. Does anybody have any questions about Austin's resume? All right, if no one has any questions, then let's look at Brandon's resume. This is a similar thing where I know he's gotten at least a couple of jobs or some freelance work or something, but his resume that's here is old enough that it doesn't have all that, so it is kind of a fresh out of boot camp sort of resume. This resume is, of course, slightly different. Every person's going to have a little bit different resume, and that's fine. It's laid out a little differently. It's kind of a top to bottom. There's no multiple columns, but you'll notice that all the same stuff is in here. He's got the area that he's located in. On your resume, you don't need to have like an exact address or anything. Honestly, I don't know where Jupiter is. That's one thing that I would say is use the most identifiable city around you. For instance, even if you're in the Portland area, but you live in like Wilsonville or Hillsborough or Gresham or something like that, I would put Portland, Oregon, or Portland, Oregon area, or Greater Portland, Oregon, something like that. Generally, you want to identify not necessarily exactly where you are, but kind of identify with where you're looking for those jobs. Again, a phone number and an email and a link to his LinkedIn. if I were him, I would say also put a link to your profile and to your GitHub. But he does have some links here, so you can actually get to things. And also his LinkedIn has links to all that, so it isn't the end of the world. His resume does have kind of a here at the top here, there is kind of a kind of an objective statement. Again, I really don't like objective statements. I think this is kind of taking up some space. If you apply for a software developer role, people know that that's what you're seeking is a software developer role, because that's what you applied to. And again, things like dynamic team player are better represented and demonstrated and proven through your skills, projects, experience, etc., rather than just saying it. So his is in a little bit different order, which is perfectly fine. He's got his education here at the top. So he is he's emphasizing his education a little bit more, because again, that's kind of at the top, that's that above the fold, which is fine. It's not necessarily where I would suggest. Usually I suggest putting education near the bottom, so you've got more space at the top for skills and projects, but there's nothing inherently wrong with it. Again, there are just a bazillion different ways you can put together a resume and lay things out. So don't get caught up too much on just all the minutia, because there is a lot of minutia, a lot of small things. And again, like we talked about on Monday, you don't want perfect to be the enemy of good. You want to get your resume done so that you can go ahead and you can use it. You can use it to apply for stuff. You can use it to post on your LinkedIn and everything else. Remember that good enough is good enough at the start. If you decide later that there's something that that you think would be better changed or better fixed, or rearranging your resume or anything else, you can totally do that. You can totally do that as you go along. You can continue to iterate on it, make it a little better over time, but there's no need to make it absolutely perfect right out of the gate. Just make sure that you do check, of course, right off of the gate for things like spelling errors and anything like that you definitely would want to make sure that you don't have. So after education, the other big thing I would suggest to Brandon is to build out those skills. Again, this is a very, very kind of just the facts in terms of both programming and tools. I know that he knows a lot more. Again, we went over that list of all the different kinds of skills that that as a grad you should be able to put on your resume, and if you're a grad, you may or may not, again, just depending on what exactly you've been working with, that you may be able to put common things that you may also be able to put on your resume. So I would suggest to Brandon filling out more here. His project section is really good. It lists the name of the project, when it was developed, has a URL so that someone can actually follow it and actually go look at that website or web project. And it has bullet points that describe what that particular thing does, both what Brandon did to work on it, and a bit about just the tech stack and everything in general. It's even got dates on it. This means that it does make for a really good, it almost looks like the experience section. If you look at it, he's basically listed his projects as if they were experience, as if they were jobs or positions. And then again, at the end is experience. Brandon has also taken his military history and crunched it down into just one line there. And then he's also got some other jobs there showing off what he's been doing. One thing that I would say is he has freelance web developer in his listed there under experience. Only put freelance web developer in your experience if you actually got someone that you're making websites for. For instance, he has actually made this one up here. I guess I can't highlight it for whatever reason. Actually, let me get the little annotation thing back out. This one here that is a business site for a massage therapist. That is a totally legit web developed real live production thing. So I don't see any problem with Brandon putting freelance web developer on his resume. But I would say, of course, that if you haven't actually worked with a client or anything, don't put freelance web developer on your resume just to try to make it look better or anything. Also, don't, if you have maybe a friend that works at a company or a friend that does tech or is a web developer, don't have them, this has come up before, don't have them kind of vouch for you to put a fake freelance or contract thing on your resume. Like we mentioned earlier, technically you do start to get to the point where you're lying on your resume. And even though for some of that stuff, it is kind of debatable how much of it is, how close you're getting to the point where your resume might not be truthful. If you put freelance web developer, and a potential employer is going to have different expectations of you and ask you different questions that you're probably not going to have answers to. And that's what you don't want, is you don't want to put something on your resume that gets somebody's hopes up for something and then leads to an awkward conversation where you're like, oh yeah, well, I didn't actually really do much for that. All right. Does anybody have any questions about Brandon's resume or about resumes in general? All right, perfect. If nobody has any questions, then I'll figure out how to get this out of full screen mode. There we go. And how do you close the thing? The way that LinkedIn opens files like this is really weird and doesn't make any sense. Okay, so let's go ahead and change gears a little bit. And instead of kind of what we've been talking with, again, resumes, LinkedIn's, headshots, those kind of things that are specific to any job, right? That you want to have done so you can start applying to jobs, so that you can start networking, so that you have those things in place, you have a presence, you have things that other people can go ahead and look at. You will also, again, we've been talking about how your projects and your skills are really what's going to sell you as an entry-level web developer. So the next thing that you'll want is ways that you can prove that. And that's the way that you're going to prove that basically is by showing off, starting with your personal portfolio and your capstone. The good news is that these are probably at least mostly done and ready to go just from what you've already done in the class. So let's go ahead and talk about them. First thing is your capstone. Unless you've been working on a lot of other projects since you graduated from the boot camp, your capstone is probably still your single most impressive display of your skills. So you do want to make sure that's front and center, that it's in the best shape, and that it's ready to go and ready to be something you can show off to potential employers. So frankly, that's the first thing to do with your capstone is get your capstone. If for whatever reason, if maybe you got it working for your capstone presentation, but it still had a couple of bugs or something like that, that's your first order of business, is to go ahead and sort out those bugs. Sort out any bugs or errors or anything like that that would trip up or distract someone who actually went to go and take a look at that website and go ahead and use it. The next thing you'll want to do after that is go ahead and get that up and deployed. You should have in your bootcamp class, you should have gone over deployment, but it probably, I'm guessing it was not a requirement of graduation. We don't have it be a requirement, but we do go over it. So if you haven't already put it up, if you haven't already gotten it deployed, then you will want to go ahead and do that. You've got a couple of options for that. Let me go ahead and share my screen again. You've got a couple of options for that. This won't help for your capstone, but in general, GitHub Pages, the same thing that you used for your personal portfolio in class, is a fantastic way to host an unlimited number of free static websites. Again, static means HTML, CSS, JavaScript, other files only. Nothing where you have to type in commands. So nothing with backend JavaScript, nothing with Python, nothing with a server. It has to be just files that you can go ahead and upload. If your website is something like that, though, GitHub Pages is a great way to host that for free. And we'll talk about that in a little more depth when we talk about personal portfolio websites. But for deployment, your capstone is a server-side project. It has, it's a full stack application. It's got a Django backend. It's got a database. And that means that you do need just slightly more involved hosting. To get those up and running, you'll need to use a hosting service of some sort. There are a couple of ways to do this, and how you should do it, honestly, depends, I would say depends on how you, or what kind of jobs, what kind of things you're thinking about for your job search and for your career. If you have never deployed a project, if you've never deployed anything before, or you are going to be looking mostly at front-end stuff and you know you're not really going to be doing a lot with you don't intend to do a lot with deployment professionally, then the two services I would suggest to start would be Python Anywhere and Heroku. Those are both very user-friendly. They're both very beginner-friendly. It's very easy to use them. They automate a lot of the hard work and make it very easy to get something like a Django project up and running and somewhere deployed. There are a couple of plus and minuses to each one. Python Anywhere is free for the first project. They'll let you put a project up there totally free, whereas Heroku does have a little bit of a cost. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's not that much. The disadvantage of Python Anywhere is, as the name suggests, it is a little more niche a service. It's Python specific, and knowing how to deploy to Python Anywhere isn't necessarily something flashy you can put on your resume or anything like that. The other one that I would recommend for a first timer is Heroku. Heroku is one that, unlike Python Anywhere, which is meant for things like Django and Flask, Heroku works with C, C++, C#, Python, Java, Ruby, JavaScript, pretty much any backend language. It's got little add-ons, different recipes and everything for working with all those different things. And it is a very common website for deploying in all sorts of different web languages. Heroku is something that is a very common service. So it is something where once you deploy to it, you can go ahead and put it on your resume. It is popular enough that it's something that is useful to have on your resume because it's much more widely used in the industry. Again, the other advantage, besides the fact that it's much more widely used and it is something you can put on your resume, whereas no one's really going to care to see Python anywhere on your resume. And of course, the fact that it supports multiple languages, that it's so big, and that it's fairly easy to go ahead and put together. The disadvantage is that late last year, they discontinued the free tier. It used to be free to go ahead and host a website. It had some caveats, but it was free. These days, they've kind of revamped things a little bit. They don't want to do the completely free thing anymore. I think they got tired of hosting things that might not be completely above board, projects that people might be putting in, trying to use their stuff for things that might not be quite above board, or just something like crypto or something that's going to use a ton of CPU cycles that it's expensive to give that out for free. But what you can do is if you look through the pricing of Heroku, Heroku has a couple of different things now. Basically, there is, it's going to cost you less than $7 a month. There is this eco one that is meant for things that basically for testing or for things that are just kind of intermittent. The app kind of goes to sleep after some time. And then the next time somebody goes to it, it takes like 30 seconds to rebuild it. So that is not, that's not optimal for like a real live application that's being used by people. But honestly, if your capstone is just something you're showing off to people and it isn't a real live application that you're or web service that you're trying to turn into a business or something, it's perfectly fine. You can also go to, you can share for the $5, you can share these hours among other projects. You can upload multiple projects. Basically, it's $5 instead of free. And if you want a project that's running and never sleeps, it's a maximum of $7 a month. So it's not free. But it is a much more full-featured, more well-known platform than Python Anywhere. And $5 or $7 is not as good as free, but it's not a lot of money, especially since chances are you only really need to run this for, say, the 3 to 6 months that you spend job hunting. After that, you can go ahead and turn it off. You don't have to keep paying for it. We do not have, what we used to do in class was deploy to Heroku. So unfortunately, there are lots and lots and lots of tutorials on the internet about how to go ahead and deploy Django on Python Anywhere. Of course, it being Python Anywhere, Django is one of the main things that people would want to put on here. Unfortunately, Code Guild doesn't really have a tutorial for it because, again, we used to use Heroku back when it was free. But we do have this, it should be in your old repo for your class that you took, but it's also here under Heroku deployment. We do have a step-by-step setup that tutorial. I'm not going to go through all the details of it right now. Again, you probably went through the details of everything in class. Everything here is pretty step-by-step to go ahead and get everything set up, create the Heroku app, get everything pushed and set up, and then to do a little bit of troubleshooting and setup at the end and go over any common problems that might come up here as well. So this is a really great kind of step-by-step guide to getting your website up and running on Heroku. So for your capstone, again, this should be if getting your LinkedIn up and running is your first kind of job search related priority. I would say getting your capstone deployed is definitely your first portfolio priority, to go ahead and get that up and running so that you can go ahead and show that off to other people. Even if you don't necessarily think that your capstone is perfect, or there are things that you didn't have time for when you were working on it in class, you didn't have time for before the demo day and everything. Before you go back and add any of that, first thing I would say is get your capstone deployed so that it's a link, so that you have an example that you can show off to anybody that asks to show off your skills and your experience. Does anybody have any questions about deployment? Alrighty then, if you do, again, we didn't go through all these instructions kind of step by step or anything. That's something for you to look over on your own. If something does go wrong while you're doing this Heroku guide, or while you're doing a tutorial to get Python Anywhere working, one thing that you definitely can do is stop by Study Hall. Study Hall is kind of combination study hall / career services. So if you've got questions about your portfolio or how to get things deployed, Alex, who runs Study Hall, is very used to people going in there and asking for help with deployment. That is a great resource for if something doesn't quite work the first time and you need a little help or a second set of eyes on deployment. So once you have everything up and deployed for your capstone, the second priority, I would say, is make sure that you have your personal portfolio. This is something that's going to, not only is it an example of your web development skills, because it's going to be a website, but this is also something that as you go past your capstone and you build more and more portfolio projects, this is where you'll be able to easily link to all of them and show off everything you've done in one place. So you should have a personal portfolio already built. You did that as part of the course, as your last HTML and CSS lab was to put together a personal portfolio lab. Now, of course, you did that a very long time ago, so you'll probably want to spend a little bit of time updating it. For one thing, I bet your CSS skills are a little bit better than they were back then. So you might want to go back and take a look at your website and kind of spruce anything up. Also, when you put it together back in the HTML section, you probably used either some filler content or some kind of maybe an Ipsum generator. You probably didn't actually have projects to fill things out with. Now that you're graduated, you do have projects to go ahead and fill things out with. Again, as you go ahead and you work on more things, as you build out your portfolio and you work on more projects on your own, you'll have more to go off of, but you should be able to start with at least 3 things right off the bat. If nothing else, start with your capstone, your Python mini capstone, and your JavaScript any API lab mini capstone. Those are going to be 3 good examples of what you've done. That are going to be probably the 3 best things, the 3 best examples of your work that you did in the boot camp. Those are a good 3 places to start. And then, of course, as you get more, it's up to you to decide exactly what you want in your personal portfolio. So again, you should already have a personal portfolio website from the bootcamp. It should have the following. It should have graphics. It does not need to have a headshot. Mine doesn't have a headshot. I'll show you mine here in a second. It does not have a headshot. But it shouldn't just be like a white background or anything like that. There should be some sort of graphics, some sort of something. It shouldn't just be plain text. It should have professional looking CSS. This does not mean it has to be fancy. Especially if you look at front-end web developers or designers, you'll see a lot of really crazy CSS and fancy portfolio things. Yours absolutely does not have to look like that. When in doubt, the best way to have the most professional looking design and layout with the least amount of work is to go with a fairly flat and minimal design. Luckily, that kind of flat and minimal design is what's popular. That's what is trendy in web development these days, which is a plus. That means that you can build something a little bit easier. So aside from that, you should have a short biography or summary. It only needs to be 1 or 2 paragraphs long. Something that people sometimes get a little freaked out by with their personal portfolio websites is they feel it has to be a very, very long website. In a little bit, I'll show you my personal portfolio here, and you'll notice that there's not a lot of text there. You really don't have to have that much text and everything on your personal portfolio. So again, a short bio or a summary, literally just a paragraph or 2 long. You can totally steal this from maybe a cover letter, maybe your LinkedIn about page. I think mine is actually stolen from my LinkedIn page. It does not have to be completely done from scratch. You can totally steal from your LinkedIn if you want. But again, it's a chance to just provide for you to introduce yourself, and tell a little bit about your story and what you're interested in. One way that you can definitely make yourself just that more attractive as a candidate is always going to be to not just say, I'm a web developer. I'm a full stack web developer. It's always going to be you're always going to do better if you can say, I'm a full stack web developer, but my passion or my interests or my projects that I've built have largely revolved around X or Y or Z, whether that is a technology or a framework or a language or even a given subject or thing. Of course, I wouldn't get too specific or say you only do something because, of course, you don't want to pigeonhole yourself. But saying that you have been specializing or tinkering in one thing or another, as opposed to just calling yourself a web developer, makes you look like a much more well-rounded person, because it makes you look like someone who has actually had enough experience to know what they like and don't like and what they're interested in. And as someone who's gone through the boot camp, you all have, you've worked on the front end, you've worked on the back end, you've worked with databases, you've worked with languages, you've done a little bit of deployment in Git and workflows, you've worked with CSS, you've worked with front-end frameworks, you've worked with absolutely the whole complete tech stack. And by now you should have a little bit of an idea of kind of what interests you, what you thought was the most fun, and what you're the most interested in pursuing professionally. So again, don't pigeonhole yourself too much, but having a short bio or summary that's a paragraph or 2 long is a really great way to make yourself just seem a little bit less like a resume or just another random profile, and look a little bit more like a well-rounded person who has experience and is interested in things. The next thing you should have is at least 3 portfolio projects. Again, if you're at a loss for what those 3 portfolio projects should be, or you don't think you have enough, start with your capstone, your Python mini capstone, and your JavaScript mini capstone. Try to include some enticing information about each one. You don't necessarily have to have all of these things, but what would be best is if you can put the name of it, a little picture or screenshot, a description, and links to both the code and to the deployed version. Obviously, something like your Python mini capstone, you're not going to be able to actually deploy. Whereas something like your JavaScript mini capstone, you could go ahead and deploy on something like GitHub Pages, which again, we'll talk about in a second. Optionally, you can put some of your work or educational history. Again, that's up to you. And make sure that you have contact information and links to other profiles. I would say don't put your phone number on there, and be careful about putting your primary personal email on there, because of course this is going to be a public web page, so somebody could scrape that. But do make sure that on your website you have some way that people can go ahead and reach you. I think when we were looking at Brandon's resume, his email in there was like brandonrhymesdev@gmail.com or something like that. That's a good way to do it, so that you can kind of have just a spare email address. You can always just forward it to your normal one, but some way that if people do run across your profile or something like that, then they do have a way to go ahead and get in contact with you. So again, it doesn't have to be fancy, and it doesn't have to have that much. I'll talk a little bit about deployment and GitHub Pages for that. But first, let's look at mine. So mine has exactly those things. Since I teach as well as develop, I kind of have this thing up here that says exactly who I am and what I do. It has my name on it, of course, and you can see that it just has a couple of things, and these all go to the same web page. Literally, there's only one HTML file here. You do not have to build some fancy web page with a back end and a bunch of pages or anything. This is literally just one HTML file. This picture that you see in the background for the graphics here is just a picture of Portland that I took. There is nothing fancy about this. If I go ahead and inspect it, let me see if I can find it. Yeah, if we go ahead and look at this, you can see that it's literally just an image, that there's no fancy CSS or anything. This is literally an image that I loaded into, I don't even remember, some like basic photo editor, and went ahead and made it black and white and made it kind of fade out at the bottom and everything. There's no fancy CSS or anything to do that. Below that, I have an about section. Again, this has, very little text. This talks about, and this is a slightly outdated version. I should really update this to match like my LinkedIn and my resume and everything. But you can see that it, again, has the same list of skills that I had before. And it has a bit about me, what I do, again, what kind of web development things I find interesting, and a bit about kind of personally what I've done, a little bit of history. Finally, below that, I have some projects. Yours is probably not going to start with 9. I would not expect you to have 9 projects or anything, but as you go, you should be able to add more. This thing here obviously did not start with 9. I'm pretty sure it started with just the 3 down here. Actually, I'm pretty sure it started with this one and then another 1 or 2 that are very, very, very old. Again, it has a name. It has what I've done this for, whether it was done, whether it's an example that was done for something, or whether it's something that's just a personal project that I put together myself. It's got little screenshots, and those really are just literally opening up a web browser, taking a screenshot in the web browser on my laptop, and then just cropping it down so that it makes it kind of smaller, and you get kind of just the fun parts getting shown off. Again, nothing fancy there, literally just screenshots. So it has little pictures. If you click on the pictures, they are links to everything up and running. And then it's also got descriptions. There are one thing that this does not have is these projects do not have the tech stack listed. They don't say exactly what technologies, frameworks, and everything they were programmed in. I'm not too worried about this for my own portfolio, but as someone who, if I was an entry-level developer, if I was looking for those entry-level jobs, this is definitely something I would suggest to myself, is to go ahead and add a little bit to the description with something about the tech stack of each one. So you can see, instead of just, oh, here's what I've built, you can actually see, okay, here are the different libraries, frameworks, languages, etc. that I'm showing off, that I've worked with. Another thing to do is, has anybody noticed yet that this website of mine has a really big accessibility and usability flaw? Has anyone noticed what it is yet?
Is it not responsive?
It is responsive. If we go ahead and if we make everything really small, it actually does work pretty well, I think, responsively.
Oh, that's not what you meant by accessibility.
At least I hope so. I meant to make it responsive, but you are close. There's something about the way it works on mobile that doesn't work, and that is, of course, these hover things. Is there a way to hover over something on a phone? Nope. So if someone goes to here on a phone, they'll still be able to see my list of projects just all in a row instead of in columns, but they won't actually be able to see these descriptions because you can't hover on a phone. So I'd like to say I keep it on my portfolio page as an example of what not to do, but let's be honest, I'm just too lazy to go ahead and fix it. And then again, at the bottom, I have links to my LinkedIn, links to my GitHub, and a link to an email so that people can get a hold of me if they need to or want to. Let's look at another example of a portfolio. I'm going to need to go back into just any of these classes will work, and go into the personal portfolio lab for this. In the inspiration, I think it's this one that I usually show off. Well, I guess it's not. Does that really not load? Well, okay then. I guess I don't have the one I was going to show off. Let's see if there's another good one, because a lot of these are of more fancy CSS than you really need. Shoot, the one I was going to show you, I guess doesn't exist anymore. But it was, I can tell you, it was very similar. It had, it was just one page. It didn't have like the buttons. You just kind of scrolled through, but it was the same way. It had some fancy graphics at the top. And then it had like a little kind of mini resume, and then some contact information. So again, you can see here the different parts that you'll want in a personal portfolio. And again, keep in mind that there is not a lot going on here with layout. There's not a lot going on with the CSS. This is a fairly simple website. It is perfectly possible to make a fairly simple website that still looks just as good as anything on the internet. The code for this one, I wrote this website, I don't know, I want to say like 8 years ago or something, and the code is a complete disaster, but it looks decent. Again, really not that much that you have to write out. It's just got these little descriptions, and it's got a little bit here in the about section. You absolutely don't go into this, don't stress out thinking that you have to write a novel about yourself. It is perfectly fine for your personal portfolio to have just one HTML page and to be fairly short. The idea, though, is that you want to have a little web page for yourself, and you want to be able to showcase the different projects that you've done, and also provide just a little bit of information about yourself. Does anybody have any questions about personal portfolios?
What time is the study hall in case I have any questions about deployment?
Oh yeah, sure. Study hall is from 2 to 4 on Pacific time on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then there's also study hall on Saturdays from 9 to noon Pacific.
And the little icon on the bottom, the GitHub and the LinkedIn, is that just something that you can copy and paste from, like the icons there?
Oh,
or did you
yeah,
have
yeah.
to-
Those two icons and the little kind of bullseye, it looks like a Target logo. And I think this little down arrow as well come from something called Font Awesome that you may or may not have seen in class. That's basically a huge icon library. It's not all free. It's like 10% free, but all the major stuff is free. So it's got plenty of icons for, again, things like, if you want to look up like GitHub. We can even do it by free, and you can see that they've got these 3 versions of the GitHub logo loaded in as they're just SVGs. You can go ahead and load them in. And then in CSS, you can go ahead and change the color, change the size to whatever you want them to be. They're fully customizable in the CSS once you go ahead and put them on the page.
Thank you.
This isn't the only way to do that. You can also just Google and find, some little images and just put an IMG tag in. But this is also an option. All right, so let's talk a little bit. We'll go ahead and take a break in a second, but first, let's talk a little bit about how we actually get this website up on the internet. This looks fancy. I went to merrittlawrenson.com and it came up here. It looks like I've got maybe some kind of fancy hosting or anything, but the secret is this is actually hosted off of GitHub. This is hosted off of GitHub Pages. If I go to Flaming Veggies, which is my GitHub username, .github.io, you can see that it just sends me, it just kind of redirects back to merrittlawrenson.com. So I am using a custom domain here. Remember that if you buy your own domain, which I would definitely recommend doing, if you didn't do it already as part of that lab back in the HTML section, I would definitely recommend spending the $10-12 a year to go ahead and have that link here. So that you can go ahead and have that for your personal portfolio. Again, GitHub Pages lets you host an unlimited amount of static websites for free. Again, that means just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. if I go here and I look at my GitHub and let's see, does it pop up here? It should pop up here somewhere. Here we go. Here is my website. It is just HTML, CSS, JavaScript, image, etc. files. There's no Python or Django or anything running here. It's just a static website. And you're not just limited to one website. Again, like the deployment, like the other deployment stuff, we're not going to go in depth about it here today. But for example, all these personal projects here, this transit map, the ridership map, and this drawing tablet thing, those are all hosted on GitHub Pages. This one's got a slightly different link here, but these ones are both just Merritt Lawrenson / and then the name of the repository, which is really nice. So do remember that not only is GitHub Pages really great for getting your profile up here, but you can also use it to put an unlimited amount of repositories that'll be at whatever your website is / the name of the repository. So you can also, if they're projects like that are literally just JavaScript projects, you can go ahead and put as many as you want there for free with GitHub to go ahead and host them, which is really nice for a portfolio. It's just things like Django projects, things with backends and databases and everything that you do have to go ahead and put on something like Heroku or Python Anywhere. All right. Let's talk real quick about GitHub portfolios. There really isn't too much to this, but do just make sure that if you go to, oops, I need the zoom toolbar to get back out of the way so I can actually click on that. Or maybe I need to do this. There we go. If you look at your portfolio, if you look at your profile on GitHub, there is actually a lot of customizing you can do. Right here, it's going to have popular repositories. You can customize things and you can actually control which up to 6 repositories you'd like to put here at the top. So you can go ahead and specify what you want at the top. I don't think it's necessarily super important that this graphic be a picture of you, but don't have it be just one of these default little square things that GitHub uses. Actually do go ahead and put some sort of image, even if it's not an image of you. Also go ahead and put your name on it so that people, if they do follow it, can see that it is yours. I would recommend also linking to your portfolio, again, putting just a little bit about where you are. You can go ahead and customize which repositories show up. And there's even a way, if you are editing your, well, it's not here, there's a way if you're editing your profile to actually go ahead and sit here. Where does it let you? You know, I don't remember where it is, but there's a way you can actually put a README for yourself on your portfolio, and you can actually go ahead and type up almost like a website where you can type up a bunch of information about yourself. That's optional. I don't think that you need to spend a lot of time or energy worrying about your GitHub portfolio. But again, just make sure that you've pinned like your capstone, that sort of thing. Make sure that it doesn't have just the default portfolio picture, and make sure that your name's on here. That's all that you really need. All righty. Again, these are the primary things that you'll want to have done and in place on your so that you can start marketing yourself to potential employers. Again, the best way to show off your skills is indeed with the projects and everything that you've been working on. So you'll want those to be ready to go and deployed so that people can look at them. And you'll want your GitHub and your personal portfolio done and streamlined so that they can show off what you've been doing and show off those projects. All righty. Does anybody have any questions? All right, then what we'll do, what we'll do now is let's go ahead and take we'll take about a 10-minute break. When we come back from the break, what we're going to do is we've been talking a lot about different kind of documents and things to build. But we'll talk a little bit more after the break about what to do kind of going forward. And we are going to start that off with talking a little bit about what you might do for your profile going forward, what kind of projects you might work on for your portfolio going forward. And we'll talk a little bit about the different types of jobs that are out there that you might go ahead and apply for. So we'll go ahead and talk about those right after the break. And it is 5:13 now, so let's go ahead and round up a little bit and say we'll get started again at 5:25. And then we'll go to, I promise this time we'll stop right at 6, and I won't keep you long this time. So I'll see y'all back here in 12 minutes. All righty, let's go ahead and start talking a little bit about our next thing, which is something that I've kind of alluded to, made some references to, which is thinking a bit about what kind of job you want to go ahead and get, and what you want to work on for more portfolio projects, and just a little bit of kind of what the scope is of what's out there. So as you are, of course, applying to jobs, networking, interviewing, all that stuff, I would generally suggest that you spend about half your time doing that and about half your time continuing to code. Then that's for a couple of reasons. Number one is that coding is definitely a use it or lose it skill. If you're not using it, then you'll forget how things work. It'll take more effort to get back into it. And that is one of, and not continuing to code after you've completed the boot camp is one of the primary things that results in people not getting jobs, is because if you're not actually still using those skills and practicing them, that's when you can run into trouble and you can forget how some of the stuff works. The other reason is that, of course, you want to present yourself to potential employers in the best light possible. And the way to make yourself a better candidate is to have more skills. And the way to show off your skills is through your projects. So as you continue to work on your job search stuff and start to put together job applications and start to network, do make sure that you are also spending about half of your time working on code as well. You also want to be working on code and working on new projects and everything. So that is definitely one of the things that you'll want to do as you go forward from all our tech career 101 stuff here, is you'll want to identify something new, maybe a language, maybe a framework, maybe a specific library or piece or something that you want to learn, and then go learn it and then build a portfolio project with it. From there, you can rinse and repeat. The more portfolio projects you work on, not only will you gain more practice and more skill at what you already know, but you will learn more new things, and you'll also make your portfolio and resume better and make yourself a more attractive candidate to employers. It really is a win-win-win situation there. So what is out there that you could go ahead and learn next, that you could put together next as a project? There are a number of different things that you could pick from. So the best thing is, of course, if there's something that you already have in mind. Again, don't sell yourself short. You have a lot of experience and you have a lot of practice just from what you've done in the boot camp. You've worked through the entire stack, and you do know what you've enjoyed working with, what you haven't enjoyed working with, what you're good at, maybe what could use a little more practice. So hopefully you already have something in mind that sticks in your out in your head as something that you either wish that you knew how to do, in which case you can learn it, or maybe something that you wish you were better at, in which case you could get better at it. And hopefully maybe you even have an idea for a program or for a website. The best portfolio projects and the best concepts to learn are always going to be the ones that you have an emotional investment in. It's always going to work the best that way. So if you have an idea that you'd like to make happen, or if you have a skill that you know you want to learn, then by all means start there. If you don't necessarily, then that's okay. There are plenty of options here. But in the end, what you do want to be working on is, again, projects, things that you can put on your portfolio, things that you can showcase. And the best way to do that is to learn the things that are going to help out with your interests. Again, if you are interested in databases, try learning some SQL. If you're interested in game programming, try picking up C++. Here is a brief list of things that may be worth doing in order to expand your knowledge. You can work with different web frameworks and different languages. We have, of course, already been working with a lot of these. A lot of things, but you may want to spend more time, maybe more time with something that we already worked with in class. Maybe you want to spend more time with Django REST framework, more time with Vue. Maybe you want to learn React, spend more time with Flask, something like that. Another thing you can do is you can use any of those things to test out a bit more about testing. We did a bit. You should have gone over a little bit of that in your bootcamp class, but not a whole lot. It is something that employers do like to see. So that is definitely, it's not the most interesting or fun thing necessarily in the world, but working on some unit testing, some integration testing, working with testing suites and everything can be a great thing to go ahead and practice. Similarly, something that isn't necessarily the most fun, but is something that is very useful in your job search is to practice more with Git. This can be especially handy if you can collaborate on a project with multiple people. That really gives you a chance to work with the more advanced Git workflow things. If you enjoyed some of the more kind of command line, some of the more kind of general purpose Python type of programming that we did at the very beginning of the boot camp, then you can consider something in the realm of systems programming, where you're doing programming just not for the web. So things like C, C++, Rust, and Go. If you maybe worked a little bit with data and think that's really cool, there's a ton of stuff you can do with data. working with things like pandas, NumPy, matplotlib. If you're interested in not necessarily the data analysis, but data engineering and processing, there are lots of things you can work on like that. Again, if you want to get more front-end experience, the best way to do that is just going to be to build applications in Vue and or React. If you're interested in design and layout and CSS, the best way to get experience is just going to be to build projects. Another thing you can do, especially if you're more interested in some of the systems and backend level development, is working with things on the command line. We just barely scratched the surface of the command line in terms of the boot camp. There's plenty more there. Also, mobile development, if that's something you're interested in. Again, if you're interested in going on the back end, aside from just building more Django things, playing around and getting learning more about how Django REST works, another thing that you can do is spend some more time with databases, both SQL and not only SQL databases. So on the SQL side, try something like MySQL or Postgres, a real professional database instead of the little SQLite thing that we did in class. On the NoSQL side, you could try something like MongoDB and look at some of the more of the different ways, excuse me, in general that you can work with databases. You can also play around with some game programming stuff. A word of caution about that, game programming is a great way. A lot of people love to do it, and it can be really fun. But game programming is also a really great way to spend a very long time fighting through a very competitive job market in order to get the lowest paying, worst working conditions, longest hours, and some of the hardest problems to code of any sort of coding job. It is definitely something to do that you do because you love it. It is not something that you do because it is a great job. Similarly, if you're thinking more about kind of server things, you can look at some of the things that are built around services and how to deploy things like Docker and Kubernetes. That is again just a partial list based on what you've done already, based on what you've done in the boot camp and on your own. You should start to have an idea of what of this sounds kind of interesting. And for some other ideas, let's look at the kind of jobs that are out there and what is best to do to kind of practice and get better, and think about what you can do to maximize your chances for these different kinds of job titles. Now, the caveat here, whenever we're talking about things about portfolios and portfolio pieces, we're talking about ways to make your portfolio better. Now, you are already, you know everything you need to get an entry-level programming web development job. That said, there are a lot of you that graduate from boot camps. Think about all your classmates and everything that graduate from boot camps knowing what they need to know to get an entry-level job. So everything that we're talking about here in terms of, if you are interested in this, consider building a portfolio project in this, or working on this, or continuing to code in this, or building up your portfolio with these projects. Again, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Don't think that you need a ton of projects on your resume, on your portfolio to start applying for jobs. This is just what you can do to make yourself a better applicant. The idea is that you're already a good applicant. but you can continue to learn things, you can continue to work on things and make yourself better as you go along. But that doesn't mean you should wait until you hit some arbitrary amount of, I don't know, goodness before you start applying to jobs, because chances are you're never going to reach that. It's always easy to justify putting off looking for a job by saying, oh, I'll be so much better at X, Y, or Z if I put in one more portfolio piece, or if I put one more skill on my resume or something like that. It's very tempting, but the truth is that while you can make yourself a better programmer and a better applicant by doing these, you're going to learn so much more just in your first actual professional job. So don't get lost in the hustle of trying to like build up your skills before you apply or anything like that. You can and should build up your skills to make you a better candidate, but you do want to go ahead and you do want to get that job or that internship that's going to get you working on real code and get yourself some experience. So just that as a caveat when we talk about all of these projects and everything. That doesn't mean, again, talking about all these projects and everything, that doesn't mean that those are things that you need to do to be ready for a job. They're just going to make you better. They're just going to improve your odds and help you stand out the more that you've been able to work on and experiment with. So that being said, let's talk about some different kind of jobs out there. Most of these, a lot of these you've probably heard of, but I bet there's a lot of these that you haven't heard of, even though you are perfectly qualified to go ahead and apply for those jobs. So let's start talking about some of these. This is probably going to take up the rest of our time, and then we will go ahead and we'll talk more about networking and where to find jobs and looking at tech job listings on Friday. So the first job title here, and the one that probably comes to mind first, is full stack. A full stack web developer. This is, in fact, what the bootcamp was, right? It was a full stack web development bootcamp. A full stack web developer does a little bit of everything. That doesn't necessarily mean that they do everything. If you are, if you're freelancing or you are the only person working on something, or maybe you're part of a very small web development team that only has 1 or 2 or 3 people, something like that, then as a full stack web developer, you might actually end up doing everything. If it's in a company that's got maybe a small web presence or something where they're basically hiring you to do everything, you might end up doing everything, much as you did with your capstone. But at a larger company, that's much less likely to happen. Once you get to a company that's working on a web project of really any size, you're quickly going to be working on something that's way too complicated for one person, even working on full time, no matter how senior they are. When you look at job listings, when you see full stack developer, usually it means one of 2 things. Usually it's not going to mean, again, being like a freelancer doing everything, though you'll be able to find those jobs. Usually it means one of 2 things. It means either that you are someone part of a team who can basically kind of fill in where needed. Maybe you can work on code on the back end if needed, work on code on the front end if needed. You're there, you're ready to go for basically whatever the company might need help with. That's one job role that you might find as a full stack. Another one that you'll find fairly often as a full stack developer is someone working on the API. As you might imagine, especially any of you that took a day class, an API, a REST API, is really the glue that holds the front end and the back end together. And so if you're working as a, quote, full stack web developer, a lot of the times that's what you might be focused on, is making sure that the backend team has the API endpoints that the front end needs, making sure that the front end is working with the back end to do what needs to be done, making sure that the website is still functional as changes are made, as people are working back and forth. Basically, you're almost kind of a person in the middle between the front and back end teams, making sure that the kind of preserving the sanctity of the API and making sure that the API is still working and that everything is good to go. Again, it's kind of a jack of all trades, does it all, but doesn't specialize in anything. If you are thinking about working on a small team or maybe being a freelancer, then I would focus on building projects that demonstrate your skill at kind of like the capstone, building something full stack from database to backend to front end to deployment to CSS, and showing that you can do it all. If you're thinking more about some of the other stuff, then consider working with things like Django REST framework, Vue React, APIs, and more of that kind of stuff. Sometimes you'll even see things like API developer or API engineer in a job title. The next two are ones that you've probably also seen and thought about, and those are backend developers and front-end developers. Backend developers are ones that work on the backend. If you're someone who loves data manipulation, functional programming, and kind of the behind the scenes, if you've enjoyed things like deployment, databases, Django, Python, then the backend might be for you. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to have enjoyed all of those different things. It's rare that you would be hired as a backend developer who would do every single one of those things. But those are the kinds of things that are out there. You're going to be thinking about servers, data, and how to work on the back end of all of those HTTP requests. So you've already learned Python, but you might consider looking at other server-side languages like Python, like PHP, Ruby, Java, .NET to further your understanding. One thing to keep in mind is that unlike the front end where the jobs are all in JavaScript and they all require JavaScript, on the back end, you'll see jobs that say things like requires Python knowledge in Python or equivalent object-oriented programming language, requires knowledge in Java or similar object-oriented programming language. You'll see things like that. And that is because there are a lot of jobs out there, backend jobs, that are not in Python. Unlike the front end, you can do up the backend in whatever programming language you want. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're limited to only applying for Python jobs. You can absolutely still apply for PHP jobs, Ruby jobs, Java jobs, Rails jobs, .NET jobs, etc. In particular, for you Portland folk, there are a lot of .NET jobs. So that's C#, that's the Microsoft stack that are available in the Metro Portland area. And depending on where you're located, those of you who aren't in Portland might find similar things in your own local tech scene, in your local tech job market. And you are qualified to learn all of those different things and to apply for all those different jobs. That's why a lot of times job listings will specifically say things like PHP or equivalent backend object-oriented programming language. Guess what? Python is an equivalent backend object-oriented programming language to all of those things. Python is going to directly translate from into all of those different languages. So as you're looking at the backend, don't think that you're limited to applying to only Python jobs. You can also apply to entry-level .NET, Ruby, C#, etc. Programming jobs if you think that's something that you might be interested in. If you, for instance, if you apply for .NET jobs yes, it's going to be C# instead of Python, and it's going to be ASP.NET MVC instead of Django, but you'll find that both the language and the framework are going to be very, very, very similar. It would take you almost no time at all to get adjusted. And that's why people on the back end do language hop. They'll go from a PHP job to a Java job, to a Ruby job, because especially for someone with less experience, all these frameworks, all these languages are going to rely on the same skills and work in the same way. It's just a matter of picking up the unique syntax. So you might consider building a project in something like Ruby on Rails or something like ASP.NET MVC. If you are looking through jobs and you're like, oh, there's a lot of web development jobs in Python, but there are also a lot nearby in insert language here, PHP, Ruby, .NET, whatever. You may also consider learning one of those and building like a basic website in one of those to get some practice. Another thing, especially if you're interested in working more with data and databases and that end of the back end, is SQLite is not a very robust and is not a professional. Well, it is used professionally, but not for websites like we've been doing. So if you are interested in doing more with databases, I would highly recommend learning something like SQL or Postgres, and just getting a little more experience working a little more with SQL and with databases. On the front end, again, you pretty much probably already have a good idea what you can practice to be a better front-end developer. So again, things like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Good news for those of you who are front-enders, there's no other languages. Everything is going to be HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You can just work on those. HTML, you'll pretty much use in everything, as opposed to whether you should spend a lot more of your time doing CSS or JavaScript. It honestly depends on what you want to do. There is a little bit of a misnomer. I've definitely talked to plenty of people myself and seen plenty of people myself that are like, you know, front end is fun. I had a lot of fun doing Vue in the boot camp. Putting together, JavaScript was a fun and interesting language to work with. All that stuff was super cool to do, but I don't think I can be a front-end developer because I really hate CSS and I'm really bad at it. I hear that a lot. And the good news is you do not have to be good at CSS. I would recommend being at least functional at CSS, but you do not have to be great at CSS to be a front-end developer. There are lots of front-end developers that are building out JavaScript interactivity in something like Vue or React for a client or for a company or for a project that get the CSS from somebody else. The design team gives them the CSS. They just stick the CSS right in the website and go back to working on getting the functionality and getting the interaction working. Lots and lots and lots of front-end developers out there who never write a single line of CSS. So so that is one thing that I always like to mention is that if you are liked working with JavaScript, but you're scared of being a front-end developer because you think you're going to have to do a lot of CSS, don't be. There are lots and lots of front-end jobs that you can find that will not require you to do any CSS. However, if you do want to work with CSS, there are also plenty of jobs that you can find that will set you up and let you work with CSS. It really is up to you. There's a wide continuum of front-end jobs, ranging from ones that do just kind of UI, UX, and CSS and design work, all the way to people who just do work in JavaScript and never touch CSS, to people who do a little bit of everything. And you will absolutely be able to find plenty of jobs in each of those kind of roles everywhere on the spectrum. It totally depends on what you want to work So if any of that, working on CSS or web pages or JavaScript sounds fun, if you like the idea of building something that's not just like a little algorithm or an API, but something that you can show to people, that you can open up a web browser, flip over your laptop and be like, hey, look at this thing, you can touch it, you can click it, then front end might be for you. If that's what you're thinking about, then again, you can spend more time working on CSS, practicing building web pages or building templates, if that's what you're interested in. Also, especially if you're interested in more of the JavaScript side, spend more time in Vue, consider spending some time practicing, maybe learning React. Just like on the back end, you can jump between languages when you're applying for jobs, same thing on the front end. A lot of jobs are going to say things like React or other front-end modern JavaScript framework. Well, Vue counts as another, Angular counts as another. Just like that, the Vue and React have way more similarities than differences. If you want to prove that you've kind of got the skills to move back and forth, you might consider learning some React as well. Or another great place to start is if you want to stick with Vue, which there's no shame in doing that. Vue is a great framework. You could, in class, you probably just worked with the Vue CDN, where you put the little link at the end of your page, but still worked inside Django. You might consider building a project using the Vue CLI. So you have two completely separate code bases, one for the front end, one for the back end, with that API in between. You might consider doing that, working more, consuming things from APIs, things like that. So those are, again, kind of the low-hanging fruit. Those are, I'm sure, the things that come up right when you think of what should I do as a developer. Again, from front end to back end, and even within back end or even within front end, there's going to be such a spectrum of jobs. Every job is going to be slightly different. Again, you've done everything as part of the bootcamp. It is a little bit up to you to decide exactly, as you're looking at jobs, what you think you're good at, what you think you're going to be best suited towards, and what you think you might enjoy the most. So we will tomorrow, or not tomorrow, on Friday, first thing, we'll go ahead and finish this. We will talk about some of these job listings that you are good for, that you good to apply to, that you might not think of right off the bat, but you are definitely qualified for. We'll talk about some of those and go through those on Friday. But I told you that I'd get you out of here actually by 6 today. So I did want to finish up right about now so that there's time in case anybody has any quick questions. Does anybody have any questions before we break for today?
You said for front end, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are the big ones. Is there anything else? Maybe you said, sorry, if you said this already, I apologize for making you repeat yourself, but is there anything else that you would kind of harp on? Because like I'm decent at HTML and CSS already. I can work on my JavaScript. But yeah, anyway, anything else specifically that like a framework or anything like that I should jump?
Yeah, I think it depends whether whether you want to jump with a little more CSS, a little more JavaScript, or both. I mean, there's no reason, obviously CSS and JavaScript are both part of web apps. So you could do a project where you spend a lot of time going into both. On the CSS side, one of the biggest is just getting practice. CSS is one of those things that you can't really like conceptually learn it just by like kind of listening or thinking about it from conceptually. You really do have to just get in there and practice, because there's so little it really is so much about practice and getting in there. In terms of like frameworks or anything, one thing you could do if you're interested on the CSS side is a framework called SAS, S-A-S-S, that is a preprocessor that lets you do some more powerful things with CSS, that is popular for kind of bigger projects and things. Other than that, honestly, just practicing things, building things in your CSS is the best way to go ahead and improve that. On the more of the JavaScript end, I would say just build more out with in the full stack bootcamp, we definitely spend more time on the back end than the front end. So just spend some time practicing either with the Vue CLI or the Vue CLI is probably going to be a gentler transition from the Vue CDN that you did in class to the more professional Vue CLI kind of version. It's going to translate a little quicker. React will translate pretty quickly as well, but it will be a little different in places. Just the syntax is a little different. I still think Vue is the little more beginner friendly one. One of those two, just spending more time getting more familiar with one of those.
Is there one Vue versus React that's more popular or more, likely to be the thing that I should know? You know what
React.
I mean?
React is definitely the one that has I forget exactly what the stats are, and obviously it totally depends on who exactly you ask and in what city and et cetera, but to kind of oversimplify things, you can kind of think of it as it's going to be like 1/3. It's going to be like 2 to 1. It's going to be like you're probably going to find 2 React jobs for every Vue job.
Thank you.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions? All right, then. Thanks for sticking around. Thanks for coming by today. On Friday, we will, of course, go ahead and finish what we were talking about the different types of jobs and job titles out there. We'll talk a bit about how to get started networking and doing informational interviews. We'll run through the last few requirements for Tech 101, and we'll talk a little bit about where to go from here, both in terms of Code Guild's career services, where to go from here, and in terms of your job search and where to go from here in terms of getting started and what your next step should be. So we'll go ahead and talk about those on Friday. I will see you then. Have a great evening.